Well, good morning again, Kurt. Thank you for joining me today for this episode. Very excited to talk to you today. Kurt, you are a distinguished principal geotechnical engineer at Ninyo and Moore. Please correct me if I'm pronouncing this wrong.
That's
Uh,
correct.
you have over 30 years of experience in the AEC industry. You had significant contributions to geotechnical engineering and business development. Your expertise and leadership have been pivotal in the successful execution of numerous design and construction projects for both public and private sectors. So you eventually worked at both. You began your career at Allen Crop and Associates, but that was almost more than 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And then you joined 1995. You joined Ninyo and Moore, and you've been instrumental in overseeing all these major public works contracts, ensuring technical excellence and fostering sustainable growth for the firm. Now, one thing that really stopped me here, I mean, spending more than 30 years at Ninyo and Moore, well, that's a lot. And it takes really, actually, I need to ask you, what does it take to get somebody to as talented and as accomplished and developed as you are to spend the majority of their career, 30 years almost, at one company?
Sure. So, one of the great things about Ninyo Moore, and the reason I kind of came to them, you mentioned Allen Crop and Associates. They were kind of a very niche firm up in the Bay Area. They did residential hillside geotechnical work. So I worked there for a number of years, and I kind of felt I learned everything there was to learn about residential construction and design. And I really wanted to work on infrastructure projects. And so that's why I found myself to Ninyo Moore in Southern California. At the time, back in the mid 90s, there's a lot more infrastructure projects happening in Southern California than in the Bay Area. It's just, there's just a lot more development going on down here in Southern California. So I moved down, and one of the great things about Ninyo and Moore was, because they did so many different areas of work. I think when I first came down, part of the reasons they hired me was because I did a lot of litigation work as well, forensic work with Allen Crop and Associates. So I started doing that when I first came to Ninyo Moore to support that area of their geotechnical group. But then I was really interested in working on public works. So then they allowed me to, and I had mentioned I had like to, do some infrastructure. So then I started working on Green Book projects for local cities and counties. And I got to learn, the Green Book specifications, which is used for public works construction here in California. It's something I had never done before. And so it was exciting for me, something new to learn. I think after, again, a few years, I said, hey, I'd like to do something else. I'd like to kind of get involved in bigger projects. I was doing a lot of roadways for cities and counties. I'd like to get into the freeway and bridge work. And so they allowed me to, as we got projects with Caltrans, our California Department of Highways, I started doing work for that, bridges, highway, projects, interchange design projects. So again, it was a new specification for me, a new set of plans and everything. Actually, there's a whole new jargon associated with FHWA work and Caltrans work. So I got to learn that. So that was exciting for me.
Is it more interesting? Is it more exciting? I mean, I have to ask because you said you wanted to transition from residential, or actually more in infrastructure versus residential. Why is that?
They were just bigger projects, residential projects, it's a single family home. It's an addition, although I have to admit some of the additions on some of the homes that we worked on in the Bay Area were bigger than most single family homes. But so you see some really interesting, big projects, but you're kind of in and out. The construction lasts, a few months, maybe a year, depending on the size. Our geotechnical report, we go to the one site, investigate with a couple borings, and a month or two later, our report's done. Construction starts, soon after. Then the project's done in a year or so. Infrastructure, the projects go on for a lot longer. The construction could be 2 or 3 years, depending on the size of the project. So And of course, the investigations are a lot bigger, right? If you're doing a highway or a roadway, you're covering a lot more area than a single family home lot. So it was just, for me, it was just a lot more interesting. And again, to see, I mean, some of the similar things, everything, utilities, right? Residential has gas lines, pipelines, all of that go into the house. But when you're dealing with public works, it's much larger, right? Because they're drilling the actual main lines, the trunk sewer lines, things like that. So to me, that was just more interesting to
What's the
do.
most challenging projects usually when you're working on infrastructure? Is there a specific area in infrastructure that is more challenging than others?
Um, I think it probably for us, obviously as geotechnical engineers, it's the ground conditions that you're in and the
Mm.
site specific location that you're in. I remember we had this one project for a public agency down here in Southern California, and they were building a new bus maintenance facility and had this big piece of empty land right in the middle of the city, and you kind of think, well, gee, I wonder why no one's ever developed this area before. It's like in the heart of the facility, it's right in the middle. It's perfect location for a bus maintenance facility because it's right in the middle. Well, it's because they had some difficult geotechnical conditions. The site was liquefiable, meaning during an earthquake, the ground would, turn into essentially water. And so there was a lot of ground improvement that went into, building this basically a bus base. But most of the money in that bus space went into the ground improvements to stabilize the ground below it. So that was an interesting project. We had a project at an airport that had an old sewer line that went through one of the terminal areas. So in fact, one of the terminals sat isolated from the rest. And the reason was there's this old sewer line that was built in the 1920s. It was like, I can't remember the exact diameter, 6 foot, 7 foot diameter sewer line. It was brick line. It was a brick made sewer line. And so the reason that they didn't continue the terminal originally because they didn't want to put anything on top of that sewer line. It was an active trunk sewer still. So our designs were requested later on, 20 years later, after this terminal was built to connect the two. And so we had to design foundations that spanned over that existing trunk sewer that could withstand the weight of the new building and things like that. The other complicated thing about this is since it was at an airport and they did have contaminated soils underneath the ground, so they didn't want to excavate any soils or minimize the excavation of soil. So
Why was it contaminated?
just over time, a lot of airports you'll find contaminated soils because back in the day, long time ago, they just like jet fuel, things like that, they just wash off the tarmac. They would just kind of empty and then wash off. And obviously you can't do that anymore. And they don't do that now. Well, way back, who knows, in the 40s, in the 50s, they weren't quite as environmentally conscious, I'll say, back then. And a lot of things happen around airports that, if you look at a lot of base closures, we worked on some of those too, the contamination levels, just because they're just standard of practice. They would empty the tanks and just hose them off. And
Oh my God. And that contamination lasts long within the soil? How long does it last?
oh, it'll that's a good question. I don't know. It'll last for a very, very long time, because it has
Really?
nowhere to go. Yeah, once it gets down in the soil. Yeah.
And does it spread out to neighboring areas as well?
It can, yeah, it can, depending on, if there's groundwater, that's kind of the worst because then it'll take that.
Carries it away. Yeah.
Exactly. If the groundwater's deep, it kind of just will sit in the soil. But again, depending on the type of contaminants, yeah, it could last many, many years or never go away.
And is it just fuel or some other contaminants?
I think I don't recall the exact contaminants of that one. I mean, it's mostly fuel or, fuel related type contaminants that were, again, most of those are the type that they just wash down off the runway, right? So
Do you serve only the Orange County area, or you're national in your approach and practice?
So yeah, so we are Ninyo Moore. We're in 6 states in the Southwest United States. We've done projects, internationally as well, but around. I mean, I don't know if we've done projects in all the states, of the United States. We've done projects, all portions, the East Coast, in the central part of the United States. as we were kind of being requested by different clients to come out to those areas.
Are there certain states that you guys prefer to do work in versus others because it's just easier? The regulations is much more flexible, or no, they're all the same?
No, well, every state varies, and within the state, right? Within California, there's jurisdictions. The city of LA and the city of Oakland tend to have very strict requirements on different things, on the building codes, things like that, especially as they relate to geotechnical and grading requirements, things like that. So yeah, it's kind of the local jurisdiction, at least in California. In other states, I would say that's the case for most areas. There is the statewide practice, and then there's the local jurisdictions that you need to follow their rules and regulations as well. Yeah, we don't have a favor, I don't think. Wherever the project is and wherever there's an issue, we're happy to kind of go and help resolve.
Now, I'm sure the geography differs between one state and the other, sometimes
Yes.
within the same state. What's a preferred geography for you guys to work on compared to a more challenging one?
I'll be honest. For me personally, the more challenging ones are the ones we like to work on because they're more fun, right? They're things you don't see. They're not like, I don't want to say cookie cutter, but right. Oh, we you ask for a foundation report. We'll do our due diligence, get our soil samples, get our do our analysis, our laboratory testing, come up with our recommendations. But when you have more challenging site conditions or faults, things that you have to study, those to me personally are much more interesting because they're more unique. And we're really utilizing our engineering knowledge in order to accomplish and design and come up with a recommendation for, the project. How do we make this project feasible, giving its conditions? So
interesting. And you've worked obviously for public sector as well. Did you ever do anything for the military?
Yes, we have. We've worked on a number of military bases as well. And kind of throughout California and I believe in Arizona as well. We may have worked in some of the other military bases in other states as well. It's not something that we do a lot, but again, it's one of those things. If asked by a client, we're more than happy to come support.
Now, I have to ask. I can't beg but to ask, because we both live in Irvine, and you're probably aware that there are certain locations or areas in Irvine that, for instance, the Great Park area, right? Where there was an ex-military base, and till today, construction is limited in at those areas. And then even when a construction, especially residential, comes up, I've heard that you get to sign a lot of waivers that you can't plant certain type of trees or fruits or whatever in those areas because of the land contamination that probably has gone there. Why is it? The question is, what kind of contamination are we talking about, and why is it higher usually in ex-military bases versus anywhere else?
Well, I don't know that, question. I know that during the BRAC closures, there was a lot of, we have an environmental hazardous materials group, right? That kind of they did a lot of work, both at Marine Corps, at the El Toro Marine Corps Station, the Oakland Army Base up in the Bay Area as well. So a lot of that work, was kind of remediating the soil and groundwater conditions. And, do military bases have more contaminants versus other industrial? I'm not sure, to be honest. Likely, because obviously, for example, military aircraft, my understanding is, they don't have noise suppression requirements like commercial jets, airlines, right? There are certain noise requirements that they have to stay within or under, right? And especially jurisdictionally wise, whereas military aircraft, they don't have those noise restriction, from my understanding, right? Because they're really there for performance and making sure, defensively they're and offensively. So yeah, I think for the military, they're, also before we had all of these other regulations and kind of guarding the environment, I think there was a lot of stuff that just went done, unbeknownst to people that, hey, this is bad for the environment in this area. I think it just wasn't common knowledge back then. And as we've learned, over the years on some of these contaminants and how they affect, the soil, plant life, even, breathing in some of these volatile organics or contaminants, could have potential health risks. That's when I think all of these things kind of came to surface. And again, the regulations came up again to protect the public health. And so we've done a lot as an industry, I know, to improve that.
Speaking of infrastructure, I mean, the infrastructure bill got approved almost 4 years, 3 years ago now, almost 4 years. And then supposedly it was expected to kind of pretty much hit the road running or burning, I should say, and start seeing more and more of these projects getting into execution and being executed. What's your take on this? Do you think we've progressed since then? Did we manage to kind of get some traction on all these infrastructure projects that we spoke about in the bill?
Yeah, so I'm also involved with ACEC, right? The American Council of Engineering Companies.
I was about to come to this. This was my intro question to talk about your ACEC partnership.
Yeah, so through ACEC, I was, fortunate enough to attend a number of meetings in Washington, D.C. and kind of learn. Obviously, our organization is very interested in the infrastructure bill, right? And in the money coming out, and how can we assist in any way possible in delivering these projects, right? To just move infrastructure forward. My understanding what happened in Washington was, we got this great approval kind of by the government. Okay, here's all this money. We want to invest and spend it in infrastructure. Here you go. And the problem were the agencies that are usually, they're distributing and overseeing, FHWA for highways, FRA for the rail, FTA for transit, FAA for the airport. And this is just the transportation group, right? They were given all of this money and said, hey, okay, go distribute it. But that distribution process wasn't established, right? They had their means and mechanisms and checks for kind of the normal budget cycle. But then you had this huge influx of money coming, and they didn't have a way to, well, how do we get it out? How do we check that, these state agencies or the local agencies are using it the way that they're supposed to be using it, for this specific infrastructure? So my understanding was the bottleneck there was really on the distribution, right? How do we get this money out to the general public, right? So that we can actually start these projects. And that's been, I think more of, I don't know if it's more of a legal issue, right? You have a lot of attorneys looking over these, contracts and these agreements and things like that. But, and going to checks and balances, right? Because obviously the federal government wants to make sure, hey, if we give you some money, that you're going to actually spend it for what you said you're going to spend it for. And we want to see the results of that. If you're going to say you're going to build a new bridge or seismically retrofit a bridge, we want to see the, before and after and see the receipts that are associated with it.
So how far have we gone? Did any of the money actually get distributed to the projects it was meant to?
Yeah, my understanding is the money's trickling out. And then similarly, ACC also mentioned, this is way early on, that, we would like to see the money come out, not all at once. Here's a big chunk. Okay, here it is. Here's $1 trillion. Go do it, right? Because there's not the manpower or the resources to deliver something that came that fast. So we did want the money to kind of flow, more consistently. Maybe faster than a trickle would have been nice, but it's still trickling, right? Because the same thing, we wanted to be fair in the consultant community as well, to let the government know, hey, we have these resources available, but you can't overwhelm us nor the other government, right? Government resources as well. Sure. So the money does need to come out, regulated, right? And so it comes out kind of evenly distributed. Don't just dump it all on us at once. But the flip side is, we do need some time and to get ready, because everybody was very excited when the IIJ bill passed and looking forward to it. And I'll admit, I think, the money coming has been a little slow in actually hitting ground into projects. But my understanding that the money has been coming out to actual projects.
So you think we're good for the next 5-10 years?
I'm hoping that this money will continue to trickle, or not
Mm,
trickle, maybe kind of flow. Flow is a better
mm,
word, maybe
mm,
in that analogy. Yeah, that there's many that the IJ will continue to flow to the projects that have been identified, and again, that was the other part is kind of identifying these projects that the money where the money will go to. What's the best use of that money as far as is improving our infrastructure, building on our infrastructure. Because as you know, our infrastructure, some of our infrastructure has been really neglected over the last, you know, 50, 70 years, some of our
tell me
highway
about it.
infrastructure, right? We
Yeah.
just haven't been keep maintaining the funds to it to keep it going. So
And when do you think we're going to start feeling the difference? We, the masses, the people utilizing these infrastructure pieces.
so the good and the bad about right? The kind of the good part about infrastructure is like, well, when it's done, it's like so much, everything is so much better, like traffic, grid, power. The problem is getting there, right? It's kind of like
Yeah.
if they were going to build a new intersection in your neighborhood, it's during construction, it's years, right?
Yeah.
Of hey, we're widening this freeway interchange, and it's just literally years, depending on the project. Could be two or
Why?
3 years.
Why? That's a really good question. Why,
Okay.
Kurt? Why do we execute at such a slower pace than other developing countries that we see on YouTube?
Well, it's regulations, right? We regulate ourselves, right? For example, a lot of these infrastructure projects, major infrastructure to go through the environmental process, things like that, you're talking about 10 years, right? To get through the environmental process, on a major project, right? Because there's environmental impacts, and then, there's interest groups that will try to stall the project or try to kill the project, right? That and all of these lawsuits that have come up. California has some of the most strict environmental processes to get through to build infrastructure. So that's a lot of it is the delay that comes from those projects, and then we can't really start designing or getting too much in the project until the environmental clearance happens. So once that happens, it's not like we can work concurrently, right? Because if for whatever reason the environmental process says, oh no, this project cannot be built, then anything that you did as far as planning design has kind of gone to waste, right? So a lot of people, they just wait till the environmental documents are approved, and then they'll get going with design, right? And
Mm.
then we have to build it. So all of these aspects, again, the bigger the project, the more time investment it is for that designing process, and then same thing with construction.
So is it
Um,
primarily the environmental regulations that's taking the biggest toll on the end-to-end timeline of a project?
I think for public infrastructure, yeah, in California, I would guess to say it's the environmental process. If you look at like design, like the design timeline versus the construction is always going to be longer than the design. But if you look at that process versus the environmental approvals, and then even during construction, there's environmental limitations on constructions. Like so, depending if you're an environmentally sensitive area, sometimes you just can't build in certain areas during a certain time of the year. So that's another reason why some of these big infrastructure projects take
Is that a
longer.
government agency or a
Yeah, it's part of the Environmental Protection EPA Environmental
uh-huh,
Protection Act. If
uh-huh.
there's endangered species in your construction zone, then
So you
literally
can't
there's
expand the highway because there's an endangered species in that area.
correct. Yeah, correct. Or you have to make other safeguards, or there's literally time of day restrictions or timeline restrictions. Hey, during the mating periods, you can't construct, you can't have any construction, and they'll block off the environmental compliance people usually will block off, but that means you can't just continue to build. You got to build around that area and come back, right? So
And I have to ask you, as an ex-president of the American Council of Engineering Companies, somebody who is deep into the process, who understands the regulations and who has the ability to zoom out and zoom in when needed on the overall picture of where we stand today from infrastructure perspective. Do you agree to these regulations, or do you think we're over-regulated when it comes to the environment?
I think the pendulum kind of tends to swing, back and forth. Obviously, there was a time where, we weren't looking at really any environmental, back in the day. We're just, how do we build this infrastructure? This is the best, for people, and I think that pendulum has swung to the point where now there's, and we are in the process, there's a process trying to improve the process or try to stop some of these like kind of lawsuits that just keep coming and coming and coming. And part of that process is anybody can, is my understanding at least. Again, I'm not completely familiar with the processes, but yeah, depending on the environmental document, right? Someone can always file a lawsuit at any time. And
But
so
when you
what
say lawsuits, who's suing who?
it's usually an environmental group that doesn't want the project to be delivered or move forward for whatever reason. And there's some groups that will literally, continue to sue. So if one, they'll have a whole bunch of potential claims. So they'll put them, they'll stack them to kind of slow the project down, right? And so, okay, that claim gets dismissed and they'll file another one, right? And so the process, so then they have to address that. So it's really kind of a stall tactic that is sometimes used that just kind of delays these infrastructure projects. And, for the overall public, it's all of our taxpayer money that's kind of sitting and waiting. It's much better if we can get it going and start using it at today's value versus waiting 10 years, right? And taking that same lump of money, which is now devalued because of inflation, and try to build, it just costs more to build that same piece of infrastructure the longer we wait. So, the money that we get today, we want to, put into infrastructure as soon as possible, right? Because the longer it waits, the less bang we get for our buck.
What's the ACEC take on this?
So we have been in support of kind of CEQA reform, the California Environmental Quality Act reform. Again, not to get rid of it, but just to streamline the process. We want to have these checks, and because we do think they're good to have the opportunity for the public to comment and check, but not just to purposely delay the project. Right. So, hey, if here's your comment, instead of, having such big windows, do we shorten the windows or give an opportunity? Hey, here's a public document. Everyone gets to see it. Here's a time period to respond. And if you don't respond in that time period, right, then, hey, we're going to move forward. Right. Instead of kind of, hey, OK, we're going to file this lawsuit. And the way that again, I'm not an expert on this, but my understanding is the way this is structured now, it enables these continuation of lawsuits where it's like, hey, let's just put them all together and address them all at once, right? So if your concern is something, file a lawsuit within this period, and let's, so then the agency, the organization can then address all of these things through their environmental process instead of having to do them one at a time and keep going back. And, some way to streamline the process, not to get rid of these opportunities for special interest groups and environmental groups to voice their concern, because those are important, right? We want to hear those, but not as a stall tactic to prevent or delay the project.
Got it. You've taken a keen interest in marketing and business development, which
Yes.
makes two of us, by the way. How did this focus contribute to the sustainable growth of your firm, Ninyo and Moore? First, what got you into it? How did you become interested in doing that?
So, I was mentioning how Ninyo Moore let me do all these different things, right? And initially, Green Book, Caltrans, I went to do airports or pipelines and water treatment plants, and then airports, and then rail. So I got this great knowledge of just all infrastructure. And then, as kind of I was more of a senior project manager, I was putting on a lot of proposals to manage projects and big infrastructure projects that we were going after. I just love that pursuit process. You write a proposal. I assisted with that. I did a lot of the technical writing for our company on these major pursuits. And then you get to, put your team together, and then you get an interview, right? And then you got to tell the interview panel why, you think your team is the best team for this project. And to me, that was exciting. That was like more fun than doing calculations and doing, literally the work, so to speak. I like pursuing work. And that's what got me in business development. And it allowed me to talk to more clients. Right? There's, all those clients that we work for, the opportunity to meet with them, talk to them. Hey, what are your needs? Like, what are you really looking for? You have a very difficult site. What are you guys trying to get? what are you trying to accomplish, right? Here are some of the limitations, but really, how do we overcome those to meet your needs for this project, right? So it's kind of, problem solving. There's a lot of fun. It is still a lot of fun. That's what I do. So it's a lot of fun for me to do that. And then once we get the project, I can direct and say, hey, here's where we're going. Here's what we need to do. And then we have great technical folks, in our group at our company who, do much better job at running the numbers and doing that analysis and calculations than I was at that. I thought I was pretty good, but I look at some of these guys. Oh, these guys are really good, right? So it behooves me to stay out of that room, and then, hey, let me go over here and get some work to let you guys continue to do what we do a great job at. So
yeah, I could only guess. You've also been recently elected as a national director of ACEC California.
Yeah, so actually, that I just completed my term as national director. Yeah, so I served there for a little over 2.5 years as the national director for AC California.
Wow. And what was your pretty much major contributions to that during your tenure?
Sure. So, with that role is I get to represent EC California at the national board. So the national board, there's one representative from each what's called a member organization or an MO. California is one. There's 51 MOs that comprise ACC National in the United States. All 50 states, and then the District of Columbia also has their own separate MO. So that's what comprises the 51 MOs. So, during the national board meetings, if there's issues or topics of discussion, each MO gets one vote. So I would be the vote for California. And, during those times, if there was an issue or something we discuss, obviously we, go back to the board, our leadership at ACC California, discuss that. How are we going to how does California get a vote on this topic? And then I would go kind of deliver the vote.
How influential is California to the overall policies and directions the ACEC take?
So, as a member organization, we get one vote, right, as everybody else. However, obviously we are the largest MO of all 51. We have the most member firms and then full-time equivalents. ACC utilizes currently a full-time equivalent to determine how big a company is, like how many FTEs you have, and then we also buy member firms. So California is the largest in both for all, and so yeah. It's like that old, joke or that commercial, like when E.F. Hutton speaks, people listen. So when California, speaks, generally they're interested on what's happening in California. And partly too, because, there's a lot of leadership in ACC that's on the East Coast. DC, obviously our nation's capital is there, but they're very interested in what's happening in California. And they're very interested in seeing, because obviously what happens in California, legislatively, at least for our industry, and I'm sure, I presume this is similar for other industries, it will have a trickle effect on all of the surrounding states, and it eventually works its way back to the Central and East Coast. So legislation that we're working on, or things that we are working on as an industry, like our duty to defend bill that we were able to get passed, that to kind of protect design engineers. That was a huge win. And now a lot of states are just excited, like, hey, California got that passed. We have, something to go to our state legislature and say, hey, look, California is doing this. Yeah. Sometimes it's not so good and bad, depending on your state, for them to say, hey, California is doing that. But, it is on a business side, because we are one of the largest GMPs in the world, that usually on business related items, people will listen to what California is doing. Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. And they're righteous to do so, having people like you representing California. Kurt, I'm very much enjoying our conversation. Unfortunately, we're caught up by time, and I'm sure also you're running on a very tight schedule. But I appreciate the time that you've given us today, and I'm pretty sure that we're going to have more conversations in the future. It's been really, really exciting.
Excellent. Well, thank you for having me. Appreciate the discussion.
Thank you for the time, and all the luck to you. Best of luck to you and Ninyo and Moore for more growth and progress in the near future.
Great. Thank you very much.